The galaxy knew humans as the quiet gardeners of newfound peace. In the centuries since their arrival on the galactic stage, they had proven themselves to be masters of de-escalation, tireless diplomats whose defining trait was a strange, almost unnerving empathy. They brokered treaties that had been thought impossible, cooled animosities that had simmered for millennia, and built bridges between species who couldn't even share the same atmospheric composition. Their crowning achievement was the Concordia Hub, a marvel of engineering and social architecture orbiting a placid yellow star. It was a city in the void, a rotating spindle of silver and green where beings from 1,000 worlds lived, worked, and, for the first time in galactic history, coexisted without the constant threat of war. Humans were its architects, its administrators, its psychologists. They were not warriors or titans. They were caretakers, and the galaxy loved them for it. Though no one could quite shake the feeling that their placid smiles didn't always reach their eyes. There was a stillness in them, a depth of calm that other species, bristling with natural weapons and psychic shields, mistook for fragility. It was the calm of a deep ocean, vast and unreadable, and no one ever thought to ask what might be sleeping in the dark. Dr. Eris Thorne was the epitome of this human ideal. His office on Concordia was a sanctuary of muted colors and soft light, filled with artifacts from dozens of grateful patients, a crystalline song shard from a crystalline Vari, a woven silk tapestry from an arachnoid weaver, a perpetually blooming xenoflower from a florant. Eris was a xenopsychologist, a mind healer, and his gift was an almost supernatural ability to understand the anxieties of creatures who had evolved under alien suns. He was patient, soft-spoken, and his presence alone seemed to lower the frantic energy of his clients. Lately, however, his own mind was anything but calm. The dreams had started a few months ago, chaotic flashes of impossible violence that left him slick with sweat and his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw himself not in his familiar office, but on the command deck of a starship made of black, jagged metal, its interior lit by the cold, red glare of a dying star. He felt the phantom weight of armor on his shoulders and the hum of a weapon in his hands. He understood complex orbital mechanics and weapons trajectories not as abstract concepts, but as instinct. In these dreams, his name wasn't Eris, it was a string of silent, tactical designations, and his empathy was gone, replaced by a chillingly precise logic that measured threats and calculated acceptable losses. He'd wake with alien blood on his spectral hands and the ghost of a scream in his ears. And then he would go to work, smile his gentle smile, and help a six-limbed calyx overcome its anxiety about enclosed spaces. He dismissed the nightmares as stress, a symptom of carrying the psychic weight of so many troubled minds. The trouble on Concordia began subtly, like a dissonant note in a perfect symphony. It started in the lower level, in the bustling marketplaces where dozens of species haggled and traded. A typically boisterous Gorok merchant suddenly flew into a rage over a minor price dispute, goring a stall with its horns. A flock of avian xylith, known for their harmonious communal songs, fell into discordant shrieking, attacking one another with their talons. These were isolated incidents, officially logged as stress-related breakdowns. But Eris saw a pattern. Each outburst was directed, in some small way, by a human bystander. The Gorok had roared about human duplicity. The Xylith had screeched about the whispers of the smooth-skinned manipulators. Eris brought his concerns to the station's security chief, a towering insectoid named Calyx, whose chitinous shell was as rigid as his adherence to protocol. Dr. Thorne, Calyx had rasped, his multifaceted eyes unblinking. Concordia is a high-pressure environment. Social friction is inevitable. We have recorded 73 species-specific psychological breaks in this cycle. The data does not support your hypothesis of a coordinated malaise. But Eris persisted. He began interviewing the affected individuals, and a disturbing thread emerged. They all reported a low, persistent hum in the back of their minds, a psychic pressure that frayed their nerves and amplified their deepest insecurities. And the hum, they said, grew quietest when they were near humans, as if the humans themselves were somehow absorbing or nullifying it. This detail was what chilled Eris the most. It suggested that whatever was happening, his species was at the center of it, not as perpetrators, but as a focal point. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, studying them, testing their defenses. His next patient was a being known as a Shaper, a gelatinous telepath whose species communicated through projected emotions and shared memories. The Shaper, who called itself quivered in its containment field, its usual placid blue color clouded with panicked shades of gray and red. "They are in the walls," projected, its emotional broadcast a wave of pure terror. "They sing the silent song, the song that unmakes." Eris leaned forward, his own mind calm and open. "Who are they? What do they want?" Pulsed violently. "They want the anchor. They want the key. They want the quiet minds. The minds that do not sing, but listen." The Shaper convulsed, and for a terrifying moment, Eris felt its mind brush against his. He didn't receive an image or a thought, but a sensation, an alien consciousness, vast and hungry, like a swarm of locusts looking for a field to devour. It was cold, unified, and utterly without mercy. In that brief contact, he recognized the source of the psychic hum. It wasn't random static. It was a signal, a carrier wave designed to agitate, to weaken, to prepare the minds of its victims for something worse. He realized with dawning horror that Concordia wasn't just experiencing social friction. It was being systematically subverted, turned into a psychic slaughterhouse, and the non-human inhabitants were being primed for a takeover. The Vex, a name unspoken for centuries and relegated to myth, were a plague of the mind. They were a hive consciousness that possessed no physical form of their own, instead moving from host to host, species to species, consuming cultures and assimilating minds until entire civilizations were nothing more than puppets dancing on psychic strings. They operated with insidious patience, infiltrating societies through whispers and doubts, turning neighbors against each other until a world was so fractured and paranoid it would welcome the cold unity the Vex offered. They had been drawn to Concordia by the sheer density of psychic energy, a banquet of diverse minds. But they found something unexpected in the humans. The human mind was a paradox. It lacked the innate telepathic abilities of the Shapers or the rigid psychic defenses of the Calyx. Yet it possessed a strange resonance, a latent potential that the Vex hive mind craved with a ravenous hunger. To them, humanity was an untapped well of immense psychic power, completely unaware of its own nature, and they intended to be the ones to crack it open and drink it dry. Their plan was simple: use a wideband psychic broadcast to overload and enslave every non-human mind on the station. The resulting chaos and the sheer psychic scream of 1,000,000 enslaved minds would, they calculated, shatter the fragile human psyches, leaving them blank, empty vessels, ready for infestation. The Vex saw human empathy not as a strength, but as a fatal design flaw, a doorway they could march through unopposed. The attack came during the centennial celebration of Concordia's founding. The grand promenade was filled with thousands of beings, a vibrant tapestry of alien life. The human delegation, led by Ambassador Eva Rostova, stood at the center, radiating their characteristic calm and goodwill. Eris was there, standing beside Kalik, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He had tried to warn the ambassador, but his theories were dismissed as well-intentioned paranoia. And then it began. It was not a sound, but a pressure, a psychic tsunami that washed over the promenade. A single, piercing, silent note. Every alien on the station screamed. The crystalline Veri shattered where they stood. The Goraks collapsed, their massive bodies twitching. Calyx let out a choked, rasping cry and fell to his knees, his antenna curling in agony as the Vex hive mind hammered at the walls of his consciousness. All around Eris, the universe was breaking. He saw the Vex hosts then, their faces revealed, a handful of station workers, their eyes glowing with a faint, sickly green light, stood amidst the chaos, their minds now acting as amplifiers for the psychic wave. They were the source, the patient zero of the infection. The lead host, a human botanist Eris knew, smiled, a gesture made hideous by the alien intelligence behind it. The psychic wave intensified, and Eris braced for the shattering impact, for his own mind to be torn apart. But it never came. He felt the wave wash over him, through him, and it was not a weapon. It was a key. It slid into a lock deep within his consciousness that he never knew existed. A lock forged in the fires of 1,000 forgotten wars on a planet named Earth. The lock turned. The nightmares, the black ship, the phantom armor, the cold logic slammed into place. They were not dreams. They were memories. The genetic legacy of a species that had clawed its way to sentience on a death world, a world that bred predators, a species that had then taken its penchant for conflict to the stars and waged wars so terrible they had to be deliberately, genetically, forgotten. Humanity had not found peace. They had imposed it upon themselves, locking their true nature away behind a cage of forced empathy and engineered diplomacy. They had turned themselves from wolves into shepherds, but they had never, ever filed down their teeth. Eris Thorn, Xenoph psychologist, mind healer, vanished. In his place stood something else. His mind expanded, connecting with a dormant network that ran through the DNA of every human on the station. He felt them all, Ambassador Rostova, her polite smile solidifying into a mask of cold fury as tactical overlays flooded her vision. The janitor in Corridor Gamma, his body instinctively dropping into a combat stance honed over 100 lifetimes. The chef in the kitchens, her hands, which had just been plating delicate alien cuisine, now remembering the precise pressure needed to snap a spinal column. The eerie calm the galaxy had always noted was not the absence of aggression, it was the stillness of a perfectly balanced weapon, waiting for a target. The Vex hive mind, triumphant in its assault, suddenly felt a wave of psychic feedback so powerful, so utterly alien and terrifying. It recoiled in shock. It felt not the shattered minds of prey, but the awakening of something that viewed it as an insignificant pest. Eris looked at the Vex-controlled botanist, whose triumphant smile had frozen into a mask of dawning horror. The Vex could feel the shift, the incomprehensible transformation from docile sheep to something ancient and cold. Eris Thorn's gentle face did not change, but his eyes were now pits of starlight and strategy, reflecting a history of cosmic carnage. He spoke, and the voice that emerged was not his own. It was a chorus, a legion of dead soldiers and forgotten warlords speaking through him. The language was harsh, guttural, a weapon in itself, a tongue that had commanded fleets that drank the light of stars. The station's universal translator, overwhelmed, could only offer a single, tillingly inadequate word as a translation for the torrent of syllables that poured from his lips. It was a command. It was a declaration. It was an awakening. The word was hunt. The single word, hunt, did not echo in the Grand Promenade's acoustic space. It detonated in the psychic void, a command protocol that bypassed conscious thought and activated 1 billion years of predatory evolution. For the Vex hive mind, it was like a shepherd suddenly hearing a field of sheep speak in the voice of wolves. For the humans, it was like remembering how to breathe. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifyingly silent. Ambassador Eva Rostova, a woman whose career was built on soft words and compromises, did not flinch. Her expression of diplomatic concern simply hardened. The lines of empathy around her eyes vanished, replaced by the sharp, analytical focus of a battlefield commander assessing a tactical map. Her gaze swept the promenade, not seeing panicked aliens, but categorizing assets, threats, and firing lanes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. A low-frequency hum, imperceptible to any but human ears, emanated from her, a carrier wave of pure intent. Across the station, every human, from the chief engineer to the toddlers in the creche, received the transmission. It was not a set of orders, but a synchronization, a linking of minds into a single, cohesive weapon. They moved as one, a symphony of brutal efficiency. 2 human engineers, who had been adjusting a holographic projector moments before, broke from the crowd. One moved left, the other right, their paths perfectly divergent, herding the panicked, non-human throngs away from the Vex host with calm, precise gestures that looked like assistance, but were in fact a form of crowd control perfected on ancient battlefields. There was no shouting, no wasted motion. They were creating a sterile kill zone. Meanwhile, Eris Thorn became the tip of the psychic spear. The Vex's weapon, their broadcast of pure psychic chaos, was now a current he could navigate. He dove into it, his newly awakened mind a scalpel in a sea of blunt force. He felt the vast, interconnected consciousness of the Vex, 1 trillion minds screaming as one, and he was not impressed. To his resurrected instincts, it was a clumsy, inefficient weapon, all power and no precision. It was the roar of a beast, and he was the hunter who knew how to silence it. He reached out with his own consciousness, not to block the Vex, but to dissect them. He found the psychic tethers that connected the Vex hosts on the station to the greater hive mind, threads of sickly green energy woven into the fabric of reality. He didn't try to sever them all at once. Instead, he chose one, a single host, a lanky Tarsian who had been serving drinks. With a thought, Eris wrapped the tether in a psychic field of his own, a feedback loop of pure, condensed silence. He didn't attack the host's mind, he simply isolated it. The effect was immediate. The Tarsian screamed, a real, physical sound this time, as the comforting chorus of the hive mind was replaced by an absolute void. For a mind that had been part of a collective for its entire existence, the sudden solitude was a fate worse than death. It was annihilation. The Vex hive mind felt the loss of its drone like a man losing a finger, a sudden, shocking amputation that sent a jolt of pure agony through its collective consciousness. It recoiled, its psychic assault on the station faltering for a precious microsecond. It was all the humans needed. Calyx, the security chief, managed to push himself up, his chitin scraping against the polished floor. The psychic pressure had lessened, but his mind still felt raw, flayed. He looked up, expecting to see the human delegation in ruins, their fragile minds shattered. Instead, he saw order. He saw purpose. He saw Ambassador Rostova standing at the center of a pocket of absolute calm, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture radiating an authority that dwarfed any he had ever witnessed. He saw the human janitor he passed every day, the one with the cheerful, vacant smile, now moving through the crowd with the deadly grace of a panther, a cleaning implement held not as a tool, but as a perfectly balanced quarterstaff. A Vex-controlled Gorok charged, its mind a storm of borrowed rage. The janitor didn't even break stride. He pivoted, the staff blurred, in a single, precise strike to a nerve cluster behind the Gorok's foreleg sent the mountain of muscle crashing to the floor. Not dead, but paralyzed. Calyx watched, his multifaceted eyes wide with a dawning, primordial horror. He had spent his life studying threat assessments, analyzing species' combat capabilities. He knew the bone density of a Gorok, the venom yield of a Xyleth, the kinetic force of a Sulkai's charge. The humans had never been on his list. They had no claws, no venom, no armor. He realized now that was because they didn't need them. Their bodies were the weapons. Their minds were the force multipliers. And their empathy, the very trait that had made them seem so harmless, was the most terrifying weapon of all. It wasn't a feeling. It was a tool. It was the method by which they had studied the galaxy, learned its weaknesses, cataloged its pressure points, all while smiling their placid, gentle smiles. They weren't shepherds. They were biologists, patiently studying an ecosystem before deciding which part of it to dissect first. Eris continued his work, severing the Vex hosts one by one. Each cut sent a new shockwave of pain and confusion through the hive mind. The Vex had never encountered resistance like this. Other species built psychic walls, shields of belief or rage that could be worn down, battered into submission. The humans didn't build walls, they built traps. They yielded, absorbed, analyzed, and then turned the enemy's strength into a fatal weakness. The psychic hum that had been used to sow discord was now a tracking signal, allowing Eris to pinpoint every Vex agent on the station. He could feel the hive mind's growing panic, its clumsy attempts to recalibrate, to understand the nature of the entity that was dismantling it with such surgical precision. Finally, only one host remained connected: the human botanist, the epicenter of the attack. Eris left that tether intact on purpose. He needed a direct line. He began walking across the promenade, his steps steady and silent. The crowd of panicked aliens parted before him as if sensing the approach of a predator far more dangerous than the one they were fleeing. The Vex-controlled botanist stood his ground, his face a mask of the hive mind's confusion and fury. "What are you?" the botanist hissed, his voice a discordant chorus of 1,000 Vex entities speaking at once. "We are what you woke," Eris replied, his own voice now a calm, level baritone, yet it carried the weight of 1,000,000,000 forgotten soldiers. He stopped 10 feet from the host. He didn't need to get any closer. He pushed his consciousness down the remaining psychic tether, not as a scalpel this time, but as a fist. He wasn't severing the connection, he was invading it. He punched through the host's mind and into the Vex collective itself. For the briefest fraction of a second, Eris Thorn saw through the eyes of the Vex. He saw a universe of minds, a tapestry of thought and emotion ready for consumption. He saw their history, a relentless, locust-like swarm spreading from nebula to nebula. But then he dove deeper, into their racial memory, the core of their being, and he found what he was looking for. A memory, ancient and terrified. It was not their own memory, but an inherited one, a scar on their collective soul passed down through countless generations of assimilated species. The memory was of a war, a conflict so vast and destructive it had scoured entire arms of the galaxy clean. The memory was of a species that fought not for territory or resources, but for the sheer, incandescent, artistic joy of conflict, a species that could rewrite physics with a thought, that built ships from solidified space-time, and whose soldiers were living weapons, their minds a nexus of strategic perfection. The memory was of a name that had been a curse, a prayer, and a final, gurgled scream on the lips of 100 billion conquered souls. The name was human. The Vex had not stumbled upon some primitive, unawakened psychic power. They had kicked open a tomb. They had found the very species that had forced their ancestors into hiding in the dark spaces between galaxies for millions of years. The species they had believed to be a myth, a horror story used to frighten young hive nodes. The realization crashed through the Vex hive mind with the force of an extinction event. The entity that was attacking them was not a new threat. It was the original threat, the one they had been running from since the dawn of their own consciousness. Their panic turned to a new, absolute form of terror, a fear so profound it threatened to shatter their collective unity. They had to escape. They had to sever all contact. They had to hide. On the promenade, the botanist's body convulsed. "No!" he shrieked, the Vex's voice filled with a terror that was achingly real. "You were meant to be silent." The mandate, the silence. The hive mind made its decision. It could not afford to stay connected to this resurgence. The risk of the humans tracing the connection back to the heart of the hive was too great. With a final, agonizing wrench, the Vex hive mind performed the ultimate act of self-preservation. It cut the cord. It abandoned its beachhead, sacrificing every one of its puppets on Concordia, scuttling the entire operation in a desperate bid to run and hide. The green light in the botanist's eyes flickered and died. He collapsed to the floor, his mind wiped clean, leaving nothing but a breathing, empty shell. Across the station, every Vex host, from the mighty Gorok to the delicate Xylith, fell silent and still, their strings cut. The psychic tsunami receded, leaving behind a stunned, eerie silence. The hunt was over. In the quiet aftermath, Ambassador Rostova walked over to where Calyx was still kneeling, his insectoid mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. He looked up at her, at this woman who had, minutes ago, personified peace. He saw no triumph in her eyes, no relief. He saw only the calm, patient, and utterly terrifying focus of a weapon that had been returned to its rack, polished and ready for the next war. "Security Chief Calyx," she said, her voice once again smooth and diplomatic, one now underlined with the resonance of cold steel. "Lock down the station. Quarantine all outbound transmissions. No one is to know what happened here. Our hibernation is over. We have a great deal of work to do." She offered him a hand to help him up. Calyx stared at her outstretched hand, the hand of a gardener, a healer, a friend. And for the first time, he understood that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a monster that bares its fangs, but one that has learned to hide them behind a perfect, gentle smile. He was a keeper of the peace, but he realized now he had been living in a garden planted on top of a mass grave, and the gardeners were simply remembering the tools of their old trade. The silence that followed the Vex's psychic retreat was more profound than the absence of sound. It was the silence of a held breath. On the grand promenade, the non-human survivors began to stir, their minds bruised and terrified. their memories a chaotic blur of psychic noise and a sudden, terrifying clarity. They looked at the humans standing among them, no longer as friends or caretakers, but as one might look at a mountain that had just stood up and walked. The eerie calm had returned to the human faces, but it was a different calm now. It was not the placid surface of a pond, but the cold, still air in the eye of a hurricane. The cleanup was a masterpiece of silent, brutal efficiency. There were no panicked commands, no frantic triage. Ambassador Rostova simply made a series of almost imperceptible hand gestures, and the human population of Concordia responded as a single organism. The chef, a jovial man named Wren, whose greatest skill had been the creation of soufflés that could withstand variable gravity, now directed a medical team with the detached precision of a combat surgeon. He moved from one fallen alien to another, his hands, once dusted with flour, now expertly finding nerve clusters and pressure points, stabilizing beings whose biologies he had until an hour ago just only understood in the context of their dietary restrictions. He wasn't healing them with empathy. He was repairing them with a terrifyingly complete knowledge of their anatomical frailties, knowledge that no chef should possess. As Security Chief Calix, his own mind still reeling, tried to assert his authority. He activated his private comm channel to his security forces. All units, report. Establish a perimeter. I want. The channel died, replaced by a soft, melodic chime. A moment later, a message scrolled across his private data pad, a message that had bypassed all his encryption. Security Chief, your personnel are being attended to. Please remain where you are. Your cooperation is appreciated. A. Rostova. It wasn't a request. Calix watched as two human technicians, the same ones who maintained the station's gentle sonic showers, approached his own fallen Calix officers. They didn't use medkits. They placed their hands on the heads of the unconscious insectoids, and a low hum filled the air. The officers' violent trembling ceased, their bodies relaxing into a deep, controlled sedation. The humans were not just containing the situation, they were demonstrating their complete and utter control over the station and everyone on it. Calix felt a cold dread solidify in his gut. They were not prisoners in the traditional sense. They were now exhibits in a zoo whose keepers had suddenly remembered they were also the apex predators. Eris Thorn stood apart from the activity, his consciousness a nexus of new and terrifying sensations. The mind of the xenopsychologist, the healer, was still there, but it was now a quiet room inside a vast, ancient fortress. The fortress was the awakened human consciousness, the gestalt of 1 billion years of conflict. He could feel the thoughts of the other humans, not as words, but as streams of pure data tactical assessments, biosignatures, structural integrity reports. He could feel the station of Concordia not as a place, but as a system, its power conduits like arteries, its ventilation shafts like capillaries. The station was a body, and he was now part of its new, unified nervous system. He turned his attention inward, to the psychic void where the Vex had been. It was not empty. Their panicked retreat had been a messy one. They had torn themselves out of this reality, and in doing so, had left behind a scar, a wound in the psychic fabric of space-time. It was faint, a trail of decaying thought particles, an echo of their terror. A normal mind would not have perceived it, but his was no longer a normal mind. To his heightened senses, it was a scent, and the hunt had already begun. He found Ambassador Rostova in her office. The room was the same, the xenoflower still bloomed. The crystalline song shard still refracted the light, but the atmosphere had changed. The objects no longer felt like gifts, they felt like trophies. Rostova stood by the large viewport, looking out at the serene swirl of the nebula beyond. She didn't turn as he entered. "Report, Doctor," she said, her voice devoid of its former diplomatic warmth. It was the voice of command. "They're gone from the station," Eris said. "But they left a trail, a psychic wound. It's sloppy. They were terrified. I can follow it." Rostova finally turned, her eyes holding a cold, ancient light. "We have always known this day might come. We called it the mandate of silence, a self-imposed quarantine of the mind. We buried our nature, hoping it would atrophy and die. We built this, all of this." She swept a hand indicating the station, the peace, the entire galactic order, as a cage for ourselves. We became shepherds to forget we were ever wolves. "They didn't just rattle the cage, Eva," Eris said, the use of her first name a remnant of their old friendship. "They broke the lock." "I know," she replied. "And the Vex are only the first symptom of the disease. They are scavengers, drawn to the weakness we projected. But their masters, the ones who first drove them into the dark, will have felt this. They will have felt our awakening. We cannot wait for them to find us. We must find the Vex, dissect their hive mind, and learn everything they know about the old wars and the powers that still linger in the void." "How?" Eris asked. "We have no ships, no weapons. Concordia is a symbol of peace. It's a city, not a battleship." Rostova's lips curved into a smile that was anything but reassuring. "You are a psychologist, Aris. You know that the most effective defenses are the ones that are never seen. Follow me." She led him from her office, not to the main transit hubs, but down a restricted maintenance corridor. They descended deep into the station's core, into areas Calix himself had never been cleared to enter. The polished, welcoming aesthetic of Concordia gave way to bare, functional metal, the air growing cold and still. They arrived in a massive spherical chamber that supposedly housed the station's primary gravitational generator. In the center of the chamber floated a perfect, black sphere, 20 meters in diameter, absorbing all light, its surface a flawless void. For a century, this has generated the gravity for 10 million inhabitants, Rostova said. It has also been waiting. She stepped onto a platform that extended toward the sphere and placed her palm on a small, unmarked panel. There was no biometric scanner, no keypad. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a network of faint, crimson lines traced its way across the sphere's surface, like veins filling with blood. The sphere did not open. It unfolded. Geometric sections of the black material retracted, not with the sound of machinery, but with the silence of a flower blooming in a vacuum. It opened to reveal a space that seemed far larger than its external dimensions, a cockpit built for a mind, not a body. At its center was a single, throne-like chair, surrounded by what looked like pools of solidified darkness. "This is the Pathfinder vessel Nightfall," Rostova explained. "One of many, hidden in plain sight across all our settlements. We built our cages around our swords." Eris stepped inside. The air was cold, ancient. He felt the ship stir in response to his presence, not as a machine booting up, but as a beast waking from a long slumber. He sat in the central chair, and as his hands rested on the dark, liquid-like control surfaces, he felt a jolt of connection. The ship was a psychic amplifier, a focusing lens for the human mind. The station, the humans on it, his own consciousness, they were all peripherals. This ship was the core processor, "The Vex believe they are safe," Rostova said, her voice echoing in the vast cockpit. "They believe that by cutting their losses, they have escaped the hunter. They have forgotten that for our kind, the hunt is not over when the prey is out of sight. That is when it truly begins." Eris closed his eyes. He reached out with his mind, no longer limited by the frailties of his own biology. Through the nightfall, his consciousness expanded, trenching out from Concordia into the vast, silent sea of the cosmos. The faint psychic scar left by the Vex was no longer a scent, it was a screaming, luminous beacon in the darkness. It was a pathway of terror, leading away from their small sector and into the uncharted depths of the galactic rim. He opened his eyes and looked at Rostova, her reflection a cold, sharp-edged shadow in the console before him. "I have them," he said. Outside the station, Calyx and the other non-humans watched on the main view screen as a section of Concordia's lower spindle simply detached. There was no explosion, no docking clamps releasing, no maneuvering thrusters firing. A piece of their city, a piece they had lived in for decades, a piece that had generated the very gravity that held them to the floor, simply separated and revealed its true form, a sliver of impossible black, shaped like a shard of obsidian. It did not accelerate, it simply ceased to be there, and then reappeared 1,000 kilometers away, a wound in the star field. Then, with a flicker that bent the light around it, it was gone. On the bridge of the nightfall, Eris Thorn, the mind healer, felt the ancient, tribal joy of the chase fill him. Rostova stood beside him, a statue of cold. The journey of the nightfall was not a journey through space, but a plunge into the psychic wounds of a terrified god. There was no sensation of speed, no star streaks against a viewport. There was only Eris, enthroned in the vessel's heart, his consciousness woven into the very fabric of the ship, pulling reality taut around them like a string. He was the navigator and the engine, his mind the compass needle that trembled in the direction of the Vex's collective terror. He experienced their flight not as a visual trail, but as a symphony of fear. He tasted the metallic tang of their panic as they realized the full scope of their mistake. He felt the cold, oily dread of their racial memory, a memory saturated with millennia of hiding, of scurrying in the dark places of the universe. This was not a species of conquerors, it was a species of cosmic parasites. And for the first time in their long history, they had bitten into a host that was biting back. With every light year, they crossed in a heartbeat. Eris's perception deepened. He saw through their eyes, sifting through the layers of their hive mind. He learned that the Vex did not assimilate for power, but for camouflage. Each new species added to their collective was another layer of psychic shielding, another voice to drown out their own, making them harder to find. They were a flock of stolen birds, constantly changing their song in the hopes that the true predator of the forest would not notice them. The irony was a cold, hard stone in the remnant of Eris's psyche in their desperation to hide. They had stumbled upon the one thing they should have feared most and, in their ignorance, had mistaken it for just another sheep to be sheared. Beside him, Rostova stood as still as the void outside. She did not need to see what Eris saw. She felt it through the ship's systems. A cold, clean stream of data that was a pale reflection of the raw emotion he was experiencing. She was the strategist, translating the terror of the prey into a map. "Their flight is not random," she stated, her voice a flat line in the silent cockpit. "Their trajectory is too precise. They are not just running away. They are running to something, a sanctuary." Eris focused, pushing past the surface waves of panic in the Vex's psychic wake. Rostova was right. Beneath the terror was a desperate, singular thread of hope, a beacon in their collective storm. They were aiming for a specific coordinate, a dead zone in the cosmic psychic field they called the Sanctum of Echoes, a place where they believed their psychic signature would be lost in a storm of decaying thought. "A graveyard," Eris whispered, the word feeling alien in his mouth. "They are hiding in a graveyard of minds." Back on Concordia, a new and chilling order had settled. The station still ran with perfect efficiency, but the life had gone out of it. The remaining humans moved with a disquieting grace, their faces placid, their actions economical. They spoke only when necessary, their voices calm and devoid of inflection. The vibrant, chaotic tapestry of galactic cultures had been replaced by a silent, well-oiled machine. Calix and the other non-human leaders were not imprisoned. They were confined to their quarters with every comfort provided, but they were cut off from all external communications. They had become spectators, watching through the station's public viewports as the humans methodically transformed their home. Panels were removed from the walls of the Grand Promenade, revealing not wiring and conduits, but racks of sleek, black equipment that hummed with latent power. The beautiful hydroponic gardens were repurposed, their soil beds retracting to reveal the silvery gleam of energy weapon capacitors. The humans were not just rearming, they were resurrecting. Calix watched as the human janitor he'd seen in combat, the one with the vacant smile, now stood before a newly revealed console, his fingers flying across its surface, inputting equations that made Calix's tactical processors ache. The janitor was routing power, running weapon diagnostics, and cross-referencing ancient star charts that hadn't been seen in galactic archives for eons. The vacant smile was gone, replaced by the intense, focused frown of a master armorer preparing his legion for war. Calix finally understood. Concordia was never a city. It was a forward operating base, a disguised fortress, and its human inhabitants were not civilians. They were a sleeper army, and the Vex had been the universe's most unfortunate alarm clock. The nightfall pierced the edge of the Sanctum of Echoes, and the universe went mad. It was a vast, swirling nebula of psychic residue, the accumulated death screams and last thoughts of extinct civilizations. For Eris, it was like flying through a hurricane of ghosts. Whispers of dead languages, flashes of forgotten wars, and the crushing weight of 1,000,000,000,000 final moments of despair hammered against his consciousness. The Vex's trail, once a bright beacon, was now a single thread in a maelstrom of psychic noise. The nightfall itself seemed to strain, its systems fighting to filter the cacophony. "They chose their hiding place well," Rostova noted, her hand resting on a console as if to soothe the ship itself. "Any other mind would be shattered in this storm." "But ours is not any other mind," Eris replied, his will hardening into a razor's edge. He ignored the ghosts. He ignored the screams of dead empires. He focused on that one, singular frequency of terror he had been chasing across the galaxy. He followed it deeper into the storm, to a single, dead world at its heart, a barren rock orbited by the psychic debris of a dozen annihilated fleets. This was the Vex's throne world, their capital, their final hiding place. The nightfall hung in orbit, a sliver of perfect black against the roiling chaos of the nebula. Eris extended his senses, and what he felt was not the triumphant fury of a cornered hive mind, but a pathetic, whimpering terror that permeated the very crust of the planet. They were huddled in deep caverns, their collective mind a shivering mass of fear. The hunt was over. It was time for the interrogation. Eris pushed his consciousness into the Vex collective, a psychic shockwave that promised not oblivion, but something far worse, understanding. "Why did you run?" he projected, a thought that was both a question and a weapon. The answer came as a tidal wave of pure, undiluted memory. A memory the Vex had guarded for millions of years. He saw it. He saw what they were truly afraid of. It wasn't him. It wasn't humanity. It was the memory of their creators, beings of perfect, crystalline geometry and cold, white light. They had no faces, no voices, only the silent, overwhelming psychic pressure of absolute, unyielding order. They moved through space not in ships, but by bending reality to their will, excising planets and stars that did not fit their perfect cosmic equation. They were the architects of the mandate of silence. The memory showed the architects descending upon a young, chaotic, and terrifyingly powerful species that was burning its way across the galaxy, the original humans. The war had not been a war, it had been an extermination, a correction. But the humans had not been merely erased. The architects, in an act of what they might have considered mercy, or perhaps as part of a larger experiment, had not wiped them out. They had edited them. They had reached into the human genome, into the very core of their psychic being, and locked away their true nature, encasing it in a prison of forced empathy and burying the key in their collective subconscious. They had turned the galaxy's most dangerous predators into its most devoted gardeners. The Vex, who had been nothing more than psychic vermin scurrying in the shadows of this conflict, had witnessed it all. The mandate of silence wasn't a human philosophy. It was the name of the cosmic prison sentence the architects had imposed upon them. The Vex's greatest fear was that the awakening of humanity would not just bring back the wolves, but would also alert the zookeepers that their most dangerous exhibit was loose. Ares pulled back, his mind reeling from the sheer scale of the revelation. He shared the memory with Rostova, the data flowing between them through the ship's systems in a silent, instantaneous transfer. She absorbed the information without a flicker of expression, her face carved from ice. The galaxy was not an empty wilderness they were reawakening into. It was a prison, and the wardens were ancient, godlike beings of unimaginable power. "So," Rostova said softly, her eyes fixed on the pathetic, quivering world below, "we were not hibernating. We were caged." Her gaze shifted, looking past the planet, past the nebula, into the infinite dark. "And our jailers will now know that the cage is broken." She turned to Eris in a new, terrifying light in her eyes, the light of a being that has just been given a true and worthy opponent. "This changes the mission," she said. "The Vex are no longer the prey. They are the primary source of intelligence on an enemy we defeated once and were then defeated by. They are a historical archive. We are not here to exterminate them." Eris looked at her, understanding dawning. "We are here to conscript them." The act of conscription was not a negotiation. It was a refounding. Eris Thorn, his consciousness amplified 1,000-fold by the nightfall, did not offer the Vex a choice. He presented them with a new reality. He pushed his mind into the core of their shivering collective, not as an invader, but as an architect. The Vex hive mind was a sprawling, chaotic structure built on fear and stolen memories. Eris began to give it a foundation. He didn't erase their fear of the architects. He weaponized it, reshaping it from a paralyzing terror into a motivating principle. He showed them visions, not of subjugation under humanity, but of their utter final annihilation at the hands of the beings of white light. He showed them the crystalline geometry of the architects razing their sanctum, silencing their every echo, erasing their very concept from existence. Then, he offered them the alternative, a new purpose. He wove a single immutable thread of human will into the very fabric of their being, a sovereign protocol that would be their new anchor. They would no longer be a swarm of psychic locusts. They would be the eyes and ears of the coming storm. They would be the galaxy's most comprehensive intelligence network. Their innate ability to hide and observe repurposed for a cause they now understood with chilling clarity. To the Vex, the choice was simple: serve the wolves and have a chance to fight the coming winter, or be devoured by it alone. Their capitulation was total. The quivering mass of terror on the planet below coalesced, reformed, and hardened. The change was palpable even from orbit. The psychic chaos of the Sanctum of Echoes began to organize. The random screams of dead civilizations aligning into coherent data streams, all being funneled into the Vex Collective and, by extension, into the memory banks of the Nightfall. The graveyard of minds was being transformed into a library, and humanity had just claimed the only library card. On Concordia, the final veils were lifted. The diplomatic hub, the symbol of interspecies cooperation, completed its metamorphosis. The central spire, which had housed the council chambers, retracted into the station's core. In its place rose a communications array of impossible complexity, its black spires bristling with quantum entanglement nodes and psychic resonance emitters. It was not designed to talk to other species. It was designed to command a fleet that did not yet exist. Calyx was summoned from his quarters, not by guards, but by a polite, chiming notification. He was invited to the station's command deck, the room that had once been the serene observation lounge. It was now a cavern of black glass and crimson light, filled with silent, focused humans. The janitor, the chef, the botanist, they were all there, their faces illuminated by holographic displays showing star charts that were not maps of trade, but of strategic choke points and resource-rich dead zones. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Rostova's second-in-command, a quiet man named Yorick, who had previously been Concordia's leading expert on non-human poetry. Yorick now tracked fleet dispositions on a scale that dwarfed any conflict in known galactic history. He gestured for Calyx to approach a central display. "Chief Calyx," Yorick said, his voice as placid as ever, "your knowledge of galactic security protocols is extensive. We would be grateful for your analysis." He pointed to a projection showing the current patrol routes of the combined fleets of the Galactic Council. "Tell me," Yorick asked, his eyes holding no malice, only an unnerving intellectual curiosity. "Where are the blind spots? Where would a force, say, 1,000 times the size of this combined fleet, stage an entry into council space completely undetected?" Calyx stared, his mind finally grasping the terrifying truth. He was not a prisoner. He was a consultant. He and every other non-human on the station were now living assets, their knowledge and biologies folded into the grand, cold calculus of humanity's war plan. Their empathy had not been a lie. It had been the most thorough and patient reconnaissance in the history of the universe. The Nightfall reappeared in Concordia's space as silently as it had left. It did not dock with the station. The station opened for it. A vast section of the rotating spindle slid away, revealing a cavernous interior bay, a hidden wound in the city's heart. The sleek, black warship settled into its cradle, a perfect fit. A sword returned to a scabbard that had been disguised as a plowshare. Iris and Rostova walked onto the command deck. They had been gone for less than a standard day, but they moved as if they carried the weight of a new epic on their shoulders. Eris's eyes, once warm and understanding, now held the deep, star-filled stillness of the void. He had looked into the mind of a hive god and rewritten its scripture. He was no longer a healer of minds. He was a forger of them. Rostova surveyed the transformed bridge, her expression one of grim satisfaction. "Yorick, report," she commanded. "The station is at 100% operational capacity. Designation Fortress 1, Jorik replied. All human personnel are awakened and integrated. Non-human assets are cataloged and secure. The VEX network is online and has already provided actionable intelligence on 12 dormant, pre-mandate installations within Council space. Rostova nodded. Begin dispatching reclamation teams. I want every sword we buried unsheathed by the next cycle. Aris stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the command deck. Seeing not people, but nodes in a single vast consciousness. The Vex confirmed the nature of the mandate. The architects are real. They are a civilization of what can only be described as reality editors. Their last known position, according to Vex deep memory, was a region of space-time they pruned from the universe approximately 60 million years ago. He brought up a new star chart on the main display. It was mostly blank, a region of absolute nothingness where galaxies should have been. The Vex fear of them is not just psychological, it's existential. The architects do not conquer, they delete. Rostova looked at the blank space on the map, at the territory of an enemy that could unmake creation. She then turned her gaze to Kailik, who stood frozen, a relic of a peace that had never truly existed. "Security Chief," she said, her voice carrying across the silent bridge. "You and your people, and every species in the Galactic Council, have lived in a beautiful garden. You believed it was tended by humble gardeners. You were wrong. It was a well-kept cage, and the gardeners were prisoners, dreaming of the day they could remember what it was to be wolves." She gestured to the main screen, to the star charts, to the blank void where the architects dwelled. "The zookeepers are coming back," she said, her voice dropping to a low, resonant hum that every human on the bridge felt in their bones. "And this time, the prisoners will not be waiting in their cage. This time, we will be waiting for them at the gates." She turned her back on Calyx, her attention now fully on the future, on the war that was to come. She looked at Eris, at Jorik, at the faces of her awakened, silent, and terrifyingly united people. "The mandate of silence is broken," she declared, her voice the final judgment on a century of peace. "Let the galaxy hear our reply. The age of diplomacy was over. The human experiment in peace had been a profound success, not in its execution, but in the knowledge it had provided. They had learned the galaxy's hopes, its dreams, its fears, and its every weakness. The garden had been beautiful, but the universe would now remember the wolves, and the hunt had just begun.